And John, the floor is open for you. Sure.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jens. And it's kind of nice to be back in Kiel, even though I'm sitting here on a Lake Huron in Canada today. What I want to do is keep to the theme that I've been given, particularly relating to lesson development, and I'm going to build a case, as you'll see, for what needs to be in lesson development from the work that I've been doing in visible learning. As probably some of you know, I've been looking at a meta-analysis of meta-analyses over the last many years, and people keep still producing them, including people from Kiel. And so I keep adding to the database, but overall, as you can see there, when I calculate all the effect sizes, how big is the effect, you can see that there's hardly anything that we do to students that harms them in that red zone. Most of them make sense down there, like the effect size of bullying, minus 0.3, but there's a couple down there that should worry us. The effect size of retention, minus 0.3, holding a child back a year, and the one that's the largest negative effect, minus 0.6, is when we label students. And take two students of the same personality and you label one, say dyslexia, Asperger's, autism, you get a minus 0.6 effect on achievement to the child that's not labeled with the same attributes. Now, the reason for that is expectations. The reason for that is classifying the child as if they're a member of a group, and therefore they are the average member of that group, which is just absurd. And so whilst I didn't say autism wasn't real, I think we need to be very careful and have warning bells when we get into labeling. But hey, look at the positive news. Almost everything we do increases achievement. And yes, my work's concerned with achievement. We've expanded it over the years. In fact, Jens and his team have done an excellent summary of motivation, a synthesis of self-concept, and that adds to the picture. But today, I'm going to still focus on achievement. And my interest is the influences that are in that green, bluey zone compared to the influences in the yellow zone. And the first question I'd ask you as an audience, as teachers, where are you? If you're in the blue zone, permission to keep doing what you're doing. If you're in the yellow zone, I'm sorry, it's got to change. Because down the corridor is a teacher with the same kinds of students, the same curriculum, the same assessment press, who is getting a marked influence. The other notion you'll hear me talk about today is every student, no matter what their prior ability, deserves at least a year's growth for a year's input. And I can go further and say that that year's growth is an effect size greater than 0.4 or better. And I emphasize the words at least, because some students need 2 years growth in a year. And if you make it the mission and you make it the source of your data, we can get it. And we need to be able to focus entirely on that. What I'm not going to talk about today is all the detail. All the detail is on that free website. You can just download it, MetaX, get all the data, and we continue to update that. That's not my story today. I want to talk to these 4 points. And from that, I want to develop a case about lesson plans, lesson design, and learning. Let me take the first one. And it's really critical, the order. Climate first, learning second, progress to achievement. So often we do the opposite. We start with achievement and we say, this is a high achieving school, this is a high achieving student. And I just think that is an absolutely wrong way to do it. It privileges certain kinds of students and it denigrates others. I want to argue that through a particular kind of climate, through a focus on teaching students how to learn, we can get progress towards achievement. And every student can go through this. Let me comment on climate. PISA did a study, 28 million students. 40% of students reported that in most lessons, the teacher does not show an interest in my learning. Ouch. 40% showed teacher doesn't continue teaching me until students understand the material. And on that, there was a very recent study, which is really, I think, one of the best I've seen in a long time. All of us, no matter our prior ability, needs 5 to 7 opportunities to learn something before we get it. Most students get 1. So how do we give multiple opportunities? When I go a step further and ask, what's the nature of climate, the climate of the classroom, we know teacher-student relationships are important. Sometimes we forget that it's also student-student relationships, but more critically, it's for a reason. And the reason is so that errors, so that mistakes, so that not knowing is welcomed. No student in Germany goes to school to learn that which they already know. It's what they don't know. And I'm at the stage of life now where I'm a granddad, and I'm watching my children start school, my grandchildren start school, and very, very early they're realizing mistakes are embarrassments. If you don't know, look like you do and hope you don't get picked on. And that is just a disaster for learning. Can you imagine playing a video game where you got 100% right all the time, where you never made an error, where you never learnt from an error? It wouldn't happen. But unfortunately, that's the nature of too many classrooms. So a simple thing to do, school leaders, walk around your classrooms, do a walkthrough, and count the error. Look what happens when students, and when a teacher makes an error, which hardly ever happens. It's just not the climate. We need a climate where error is welcomed. What about the emotional feelings of students? How important is that? Well, we have an app, and there's many out there, and in that app, teacher stops during the day and asks the students to record their feeling. How are you feeling right now? We have about 300,000 students, and so I ask you, what's the most dominant feeling that students experience in classrooms around the world? By a long way. Boredom. And teachers, you caused it. You can fix it. And the fascinating thing is most teachers have no idea which kids and how often they are bored, but it is the most common denominator. And when you think of it, boredom is lack of challenge. Students want to be challenged. Of course, there's an art. Not too hard, not too easy, not too boring. That's the Goldilocks principle that we use. And then what about engagement? How do we engage students in learning? And when Amy Berry did her work and she interviewed about 1,000 teachers asking, how do you know when your students are engaged? The dominant answer was, they are doing the work. And sadly, in a lot of doing, there is no learning. We can't create lessons that are just full of activities that make kids enjoy doing the activities if there's no learning in those activities. So Amy developed a different model where she looked at disrupting students, which are easy to detect. Then she looked at the avoiding and the withdrawing, who are successful at getting underneath the visibility of the teacher. Then, of course, there are the participating, but there's also the investing and driving. And you're going to hear a lot about driving this afternoon. And the argument here also is you don't classify the student in one of these categories. You look to where the student is right now, and your aim is to move from passive to active, and then from participating to investing to striving. And that's the notion of engagement that we're going to use today. Probably the most dominant influence on students is expectations. And Kristen Ruby-Davey and our team argued that teachers with high expectations tended to have it for all the students, and teachers with low expectations tended to have it for all the students. And you can see the effects. They're ginormous. Look at the high expectation teachers. Double the rate of learning. Look at those teachers with low expectations. It doesn't matter what program, it doesn't matter what teaching. In fact, in the videos Christine has of high and low expectation teachers, they're teaching the same way. Same methods, same curriculum. But, and this leads to one of the big findings, it's less what teachers do that matters, and it's more what teachers think. And look at the effect size of parents, the largest effect of all parent influences. And of course, students. And that's good and bad. Like a student in your class who thinks they're going to get a D and they're happy when they get a D, your job's to mess that up. Your job is to help them get a C and raise their expectations. And this is why when I hear some schools saying we want to help students reach their potential, I cringe at that. I don't want students to reach their potential. I want students to exceed what they think is their potential. And so you're going to see expectations pretty dominant throughout this and how teachers think. Christine went into classes, and we've just published an article last year with 40 different differences, and just look at these 4. And the point I want to make is that the nature of the class is dramatically different because of how they think. And it's the thinking action that leads to these differences. So what are the messages from climate? I'm going to argue it's that as students start to learn, they become motivated. Motivating more often comes second, not first. I'm going to argue that engagement is much more than participation. That challenge is the core. And it's the argument against the board, and boredom is the enemy. High expectations are critical. Avoid grouping. Now, let's be careful. Within class grouping has an effect size of 0.5, provided it's not labelled and it's not permanent. And students need multiple opportunities to learn. So let me look at this notion of students driving their learning. There was a great meta-analysis a few years ago on students' control of learning, which had an effect size of 0. Novices don't know what novices don't know. Control is not the answer. And so we spent a lot of time trying to come up with the right language. And it's this notion of driving. Like when you teach your teenager to drive a car, you're there at the start, you've got your foot on the brake, you're watching them, oh, wow. And then after a while, you have to give them. You have to release responsibility. And sooner or later, you're going to have to get out of the car and let them drive alone. Same metaphor we want to look at. Now I'm going to start here with this notion of cognitive complexity. And the model that we use is looking at 3 forms of knowledge. The knowing that, or the surface, the facts, the content, the procedures, the rules. And then there's the knowing how, the deeper thinking, the connections, the relating between ideas, the problem solving. And then surely, one of our arguments is we teach students things so they can apply them in new situations. The transfer. Now, the difference between deep and transfer is important, but not as big as the difference between the surface and the deep. And I want you, like me, to be greedy. I want them all. I don't want to hear discussions where, oh, we're a knowledge-rich curriculum. We're a knowledge-rich school. Oh, no, we're a problem-solving, discovery learning school. Madness. There's a right time and there's a wrong time, but we want them all. Let's get real. You can't problem solve without knowing content. And that's why problem solving has such a low effect size, because so often students are made to go into problem solving, discovery, inquiry before they have the content, and that doesn't work. And so my argument is that we need to look at, particularly when we look at our data, separating out the surface from the deep. Too often, what we do in our lessons is we make the content harder and harder and harder, more difficult. We make the problem solving more and more difficult and so on. And that's okay. But we forget complexity. And I wish, if I was a curriculum developer, I would take half out of the curriculum to allow teachers and students to go deeper. And I challenge you to go back to when you were at school. What do you remember? What tasks, what activities do you remember? And I will almost guarantee that it's tasks that you went deeper on, that you went past the content to the knowing how and relationships to the transfer. And we're working at the moment with our special education students, saying that they need more than anything else transfer, and that's what they need upfront. And oh my goodness, all students could learn from that. So we do make this distinction between difficulty and complexity. And our answer is simple, 2. We want 2 success criteria. One about the content and the knowledge, and one about... It's not about learning lots. It's lots and deeper. And as you're going to see, I want 2 activities. You're going to see the learning strategies differ, and you're going to see the teaching methods differ, depending on whether the focus today is the content or the depth. Let me show you. Direct instruction. For the content, it's very high effect sizes, and for problem solving, for knowing how, quite low. It's the exact opposite for problem-based learning. Problem-based learning works when students have the knowledge and then they're put into problem-based inquiry and discovery. But it doesn't work very well for teaching the content. Hence, I want 2. We won't employ anyone in our teams, for example, who say, oh, I'm a direct instruction teacher, or I'm a problem-based teacher, because it depends when. And the when relates to the complexity and the content, the surface or the deep. I want to go one step further. I can classify many different teaching methods, red being successful, blue being not successful. We're in the process of putting our effect size numbers into all this. We're not quite there yet, but trying to make the point all the time that successful teaching needs to be aligned with the content. Hence, we call our model the intentional alignment model. And we're saying at certain times, you have to teach this way to get the content and this way to teach the depth. Now, here's an interesting notion. As we've found, sometimes we start by teaching the depth to find out what the students know and don't know. Then go and teach the content and then go back to the depth. And we iterate across depending on what the knowledge the students have. It's not necessarily always surface to deep. It is teachers being intentionally aware of making sure the students have both the content and the depth. One of the things we do is we ask teachers, and if I had the chance today with you, I would say to you, tell me about your theory of teaching. And if you're like most teachers, you could talk for hours. We have very strong theories of teaching, and I think that's wonderful. Now, I'm going to ask you, what's your theory of learning? I was in Switzerland last year and I asked that question, and I then asked, tell me about a learning theorist. And they all said Piaget, which is kind of nice because Piaget was Swiss. And then I had to remind them that Piaget wrote his book on learning 100 years ago. And there's been a whole lot of learning theories since then. I just think it's remarkable. Students are obsessed with learning. Teachers are obsessed with teaching. Remember, I want you to be greedy. I want both. Now, I know also, if you tell me your theory of teaching and your theory of learning are the same, that's just not the case. This is our theory of learning. The knowing that, to the knowing how, the knowing with, the deep, surface to deep to transfer. We also make a distinction, as you'll see why in a moment, between first being exposed to content, the acquiring phase, and then consolidating it. And I'm not sure teachers were as good as teaching consolidation as we think we are. And similarly, the knowing how, first encountering problem solving, connections, and then consolidating it. And what we found is we did a synthesis of about 400 different learning strategies. Now, of course, we were trying to find the top 12 to learning strategies, and as you're going to see, we did. But they differed in their effectiveness depending where they were in the learning cycle. Like when you first expose students to a new idea, if the students don't have skills outlining and summarizing, then for them, it's just incoming data, and very, very soon, they can't cope their cognitive load is too small, and no wonder they get bored. No wonder they turn off. Now, this is not you giving them notes and outlining. This is you teaching them. And I challenge you in your classes to say to the students, I'm going to talk to you for 15 minutes. I want you to take notes. I'm going to collect them in. I'll give you some time to organize them. Some students will hand in a blank sheet of paper. Some students will hand in a verbatim script of everything you said, which means nothing was happening up here. It's a skill that needs to be taught. And we know, for example, at the knowing that acquiring stage, memorization has an effect size of 0.03. But look at it consolidating. There's a right time for memorization and there's a wrong time. And at that consolidating stage, I think it's the most fascinating. We need to have coat hangers to hang the data. We need to practice, deliberate practice, retrieval practice, spacing. Like the oldest study, Ebbinghaus from Germany, 1856, where he asked, is it better to do 10 problems today or one problem each over 10 days? And it's the most replicated study in psychology. It's the most meta-analysis study. We know that spaced is much better than massed. I have yet to see any textbook that students have that's on spaced practice, that does spacing. Don't see it. And I recall a study last year in the USA where they looked at 150 different books that initial teacher education used. And the first question they asked was, how many pages total across those 150 books talked about learning? 5. 5 pages over 150 books. How many talked about spaced versus massed? 0. I just think this is a really important part that we need to teach our students, that now's the time to overlearn so that you can go to D. Unfortunately, some of our students overlearn so they can go to a test. The test is not the end. The deep learning's next. And this is where relating ideas, seeking feedback, seeking clarity. And then look at the knowing how consolidating. This is the time for student voice about learning. Student voice at the surface, 0 to negative. Why? Because students teach each other the wrong content. But at the deep level, this is where you think aloud. This is self-verbalization, self-consequences. That's really critical. One of the projects that my wife did a few years ago was an app to do classroom observation. And we have about 10,000 hours of teacher classrooms. I thought this is a great way to ask the question I wanted to know. And I'll ask it of your classes too. How many times in 10,000 hours did a teacher think out loud? Or did the teacher ask a student to think aloud? 0. Classrooms are not known for thinking. They're known for doing. You can see there's a right time and there's a wrong time for thinking aloud, but wow, it is so infrequent. And every student in your class who doesn't know the answer is sitting there saying, how did you do it? Now there's a problem, and that often when we and students think aloud, they have a very poor narrative about thinking. Oh, I did this, I read it, I made this connection. But actually really good thinkers are very good at error management. They think over here, didn't work. So they go over here and they move and they iterate towards the answer. But when they say what they did, they say they went from here to there and they forget the divergences. So there is a skill inquired. There's patience, there's safety, there's trust needed to get students to explore. And I think this is one of the more exciting things about AI. You can ask AI, how did you do it? Come up with a different way to show me the answer. And you can have multiple ways. And students can start to see there are multiple ways. There's not necessarily one right way to get the answer. I think that's exciting. So what does it mean to drive learning? Well, Do you see this absolutely clearly in 4 and 5-year-olds? I want to see it at every age. I want to be able to go up to a student and hear them talking about their current level of understanding. They should know where they're going and have the confidence to take on the challenge. They should be able to select the tools to guide their own learning, seek and activate feedback, see errors or opportunities to learn, not embarrassments, evaluate their progress, and the ultimate exit ticket is they can teach others. Now notice what we're not using here. There's no concept of individualization. There's no concept of personalization, because we want students to do this alone and with others. The learning with others is quite dramatic. And how do we capitalize on that? The simple motto of the whole visible learning work is when teachers see learning through the eyes of the students, and when teachers teach students, become their own teachers. And that's what we mean by students driving their learning. So what's the message from this one? We want two. We want surface and we want deep. We need to align the teaching. We need to align the learning strategies to the surface and the deep. And the aim is to develop students driving their learning, and that's going to require us to release our responsibility. Okay. This one is the theme that I've been using for many years, because I don't want teachers to use my work by saying, I'm going to do all those things at the top of his chart, I'm not going to do the things at the bottom. You take something from the top, like reciprocal teaching, and you implement it poorly, it's not going to have an effect. I want you to know your impact. I want you to look at the effect of your implementation in your classroom. What I do is I give you probabilities. If you do these things, you have a higher probability of having success. But ultimately, it comes down to you. And the other reason I like Know Thy Impact is it begs the question, what do you mean by impact? If you mean the students are going to get higher test scores, I don't want my grandchildren in your class. That's boring. I want, as you can see, I want students to be in a class that's safe and inviting to learn. I want it in a class where the teacher is concerned about the confidence to take on challenges, respect for self, respect for others. And I want to be in a class where I'm taught the strategies of learning so that I make progress to achieve it. Let me be more specific about progress to achievement. On the side of the chart is achievement, and we all know how to measure that. On this side of the chart is progress. And yes, we use effect sizes over time. And what we want to know as teachers and as students and as parents and as a system, if students start above average but not making a year's growth, they're cruising. They're going nowhere. No one wants to be in a class where the students start below average and don't make a year's growth. Shouldn't we esteem those students and those teachers and those schools where the students start below average but make more than a year's growth, the growth schools? And of course, everybody wants to be in the lucky country where they start above average and they make more than a year's growth. Here's my point. High achieving schools are not necessarily the best schools in Germany. Because the minute you talk about high achieving schools, and I know you do this because of the way I've been in your system, I've seen what happens. I know parents think that high achieving schools are good schools. No, not if they're cruising. I could show you, for example, why Australia has slipped from the top 5 until 2022 down to 25th in PISA. 50% of our schools in Australia are cruising. We've had such a long discussion about high standards and high achieving, it's distorted the whole system to defend cruising schools. The best schools in Germany are those. The best students in the class are those. The best teachers are those quadrants. Let me be specific. Here's an example of a class test. No PISA, no standardised. And the teacher has simply plotted progress by achievement. Now look at Daniel and Tane. On the achievement continuum, they're number 1 and 2 in the classroom. And I bet Daniel and Tane go home and say, yes, I'm first and second. I bet many teachers say, yes, Daniel and Tane are smart. They know all the stuff. No. I want to know, teacher, what did you do to Daniel you didn't do to Tane? Tane is that class's almost biggest loser. Going nowhere. Cruising. Look at Ryan and Connor. On the achievement continuum, they're bottom of the class. But wow. Oh, look at Ryan. He's one of the class's best, fastest learner. And I want to know what that teacher's doing to the Ryans and the Jadens and the Bideys and the Lornas and the Daniels, but they're not doing to the Tanes and the Jadens and the Connors and the Brandons. It's a different way of thinking about assessment. It's a different way of thinking about your data. And of course, I'm arguing it's the right way to think. It's not the right way to think in terms of achievement alone. It is progress to achievement. And so when I do my data, my lessons, I am a little fixated about progress to achievement. And again, I think one of the most exciting things about AI coming on is we're going to have much better tools to look at progress over time. We've been able to put a student's piece of work in, say, over 6 weeks, and get a plot of their changes, see where they've made the differences, of how they're going about their progress. And therefore, I can reintroduce one of the most powerful words into our business. How do we accelerate our learning? Now, what I just said now, it's a different way of thinking about assessment. I said earlier, it's less about what teachers do and more about how they think. So what is that thinking? Well, we call it evaluative thinking. And evaluative thinking asks, firstly, the 3 impact questions. What did I teach well today? And what did I not teach well? Who did I teach well? And who did I not teach well? And how much progress did I make today with these students? When you walk into a classroom, I want you to say, my job today is to evaluate my impact. And then the students are the beneficiaries. What evidence did you use to make those judgments? A critical question. What evidence would you accept you're wrong? Not right. It's easy to find. But what evidence would you accept you're wrong? Because that's what you have to attend to next. And can I stand in the shoes of others? Can I stand in the shoes of my students and see the impact of my teaching? Can I stand in the shoes of my fellow teachers and have discussions about what we mean by impact? That's what we mean by evaluative thinking. So this section, it's about progress to achievement. It's about continuous and obsessively knowing the impact, the what, the who, and the how much. Let me go to the last one. How do we do it collectively? How do we do it together? Like when you look at the notion of collective efficacy, you can see it triples, almost quadruples the rate of learning. This fascinates me. This means we get teachers together talking about their impact, not about their lesson plan, not about their individual students one by one and their attributes, but about their impact. Bring along 2 pieces of students' work now and 3 months later. Have a debate about whether that's 3 months' growth. Bring along assessments and talk about moderation. And it has a triple the rate on learning, and the student's not even in the room. And this is something we need to do, and we do in our schools that we work in so often. Getting teachers talking about moderation, getting them getting confident, motivate all students, questioning their expectations, really believing that all students can learn and contesting those who argue that, looking at their relative impact of their teaching practices on their surface and deep learning, and are aware of the impact of other classes. Now, this requires incredibly strong, courageous leadership. It requires time to do that. But as you can see from the data, it is the most powerful thing that we can do to increase our students' progress to their achievement. And so, let me introduce you to Grant Smith. Grant is in charge of the early years in his school, in Catherine High School in Australia, years 1, 2 and 3. And you can see down the side there, he's got his success criteria for his first 13 weeks of the school year at age 5. And along the bottom are the photographs of all the students. The dark green stickies, the students can do that. The yellow, not yet. Now, a teacher can't walk into the staff room and switch the yellow to a green. The teacher has to bring along the evidence that the child can do this particular success criteria. And the teachers have a debate, and they all have to agree that the yellow can go to green. If they don't agree, Grant, as the leader of this group, can go and work and talk with the student and make the decision. And then they collectively celebrate. Now, you can probably see about the third row down from the top, almost every student can do that. So why are we still teaching it? So they work together to change the success criteria. Now, my point is, this is to teach collective efficacy about impact in action. This is the thing in Catherine High School that's allowed every single one of their students by age 8 to reach level 1 in PISA. And I can assure you that Catherine is one of the poorest areas in the remote part of Australia. Very successful. Why? Because of Grant and collective efficacy. So what's my message here? Progress to achievement collectively. How do we get, well, that slide's wrong, I'm sorry. Forget the buzzy B. The buzzy B is there because one of the attributes of collective efficacy is teachers are very nosy. They want to get inside how the teacher's thinking, how other teachers are thinking. Now let me bring all this together. And then we come back to the theme that Jen's asked me to talk about, lesson planning. I want to now go to my implementation model. And I want to talk about how we implement all this research into our lessons. And our implementation model is 4 parts. Great diagnosis, obviously high probability interventions, high fidelity of implementation, and evaluation. What I'm doing is I'm going into my AI machine and I'm creating prompts. And as you can see for the first one, my prompts want both surface and deep. And by the way, Jen's happy for this PDF to be distributed afterwards, and I have a lot more detail that I include in my prompts, and I'd love you to start thinking about how you can improve these. Then I create a rubric and a progression, because I want to see how we should progress to those success criteria as part of my lesson. And I look at it in terms of 3 proficiency levels, and you can choose yours: emerging, expanding, and bridging. You can choose whatever the content is, and obviously you're going to have to insert that as part of your prompts. Cognitive task analysis. I want to know as a teacher up front, what are the errors? What are the common misconceptions? Because I guarantee students will make those. And if they don't, and they can already do the work, why am I teaching it? And I also want to know about their readiness. Like Graham Nuttall showed, that 40 to 50% of everything taught in every classroom, the students know already. No wonder classes are boring. The work's too easy. So what is their priority? You can see there, I construct 5 multiple choice, 5 deeper questions. I test the kids to find out, and I do that up front before I go to my next phase. Because what we found in our work is if you go too far down the lesson design, teachers are going to administer that lesson design regardless of whether the students know or not. And that's not healthy. We then go to the intervention, and we ask, and behind the scenes here, I have put in that graph I showed you before with the red and blue related to teaching methods. We've got behind the scenes, we've put into the AI machine all the learning models and quite a lot of stuff about complexity. And then we say, align the teaching methods with the difficulty and complexity. Align the lesson plans, lesson strategies. We have principles of learning, like the Rosen Show. We've developed our own principles of learning in our recent book, Great Learners by Design. And in light of that, we ask you to create a 6-week lesson plan. We don't work in 1 week, it's too short. 10 weeks, it's too late. And you can see related curricula, obviously, and down the list. Use optimal and aligned high-impact teaching strategy. Provide multiple opportunities. Highlight the teaching of the high-impact learning strategies. Make sure they're built into the lesson planning. See multiple opportunities to learn. Provide teachers information about the impact of all this. And if you've ever used AI, you know this is done in milliseconds. It does all this. And you know if you don't like the answer, tweak prompts and try again. What about the implementation? Ensure the lesson plan uses the strategies to sustain attention, curiosity, and effort. We look at it in terms of those engagement levels. How do you move the students from participating to striving to driving? How do we detect if the students are avoiding and withdrawing? We ask them, for example, given the artifact of students' work from a lesson and concerning this problem, analyze the errors. It's stunning how it's much better often than we as humans, because it gets down and deep at each child and says, this is where the student made the error, and here's how you can fix it, and create mini lessons for that student to fix it. And then we have some closure at the end about summarizing key learning points, allowing time for students to engage and reflect. And then can you teach other students this? And the final stage, which is the easiest stage, is evaluation. We just do that readiness that we did at the beginning again. And the machine, given behind the scenes, can calculate the effect sizes for each student, can plot the progression, can summarize it and tell us what we did well and we didn't do well. And my point here, I think we are living in a very exciting time. We have a tool that can be such time saver, much more efficient. And my other message here is the human. The teacher is still in the middle. We're not devolving this and going to a lesson planning engine and saying, hey, create a lesson about this topic. We're building it based on research. We're building it based on interacting with it, tweaking the prompts. And as I said, I'd love Jens and Thorpe and others in the team that are exploring with AI, many of you, to take these prompts. I'm happy to send you my more expansive, about 30-page set of prompts with all the learning strategies in it, with all that. And I just think it's an exciting time when you ask about what's the place of data? What's the place of constructing lesson plans in this day and age? We know an incredible amount about research. I do think there is a science of learning. I do think there is a science of teaching. There is an artistic complexity here about us using it, us as the center of this. I think there are options also where we can build in parts opportunities for students to go in and do prompting, provided we teach them how to question. It's interesting when we look at classroom observation, teachers ask between 150 to 200 questions a day that require less than 3-word answers. Where we ask how many questions does a class ask about their work per day that they don't understand the work? I'm ruling out questions like, can I go to the toilet, or what page am I on? 2. Students know. It's the teacher's job to ask questions. In AI, we have to teach the students to ask questions. And so I think we're living in a very, very exciting stage. I think that we can take the kind of work that I've been doing and ask about what's the nature of data, what's the nature of lesson planning in our schools, and through the successful use of AI, we can turn this into action. Now at this point, I'm terrified here, Christian. Stop sharing my screen. Can I do that safely? And see if there's... Now before I ask for comments, elaborations, anyone want to contest anything I said or want to know more or questions, can I ask you to spend some time talking to your colleagues next to you? What's your take-home message today? What do you want to know more about? So let's take a moment and I'll do some testing now whether I can bring up the whole screen. Your turn.
So. Hi, John. Thank you very
Can
much for this
Can
wonderful
I turn
talk.
the screen?
Can you hear me?
Wait. Yes, but can you see me, or can I get rid of the screen and?
We can see you and hear you. So
Okay.
everything is wonderful for us. So, okay, so now we have some minutes for the discussion, for some questions and comments. So who wants to ask a question or to give a comment or to say hello to John? I will give you the microphone then. Olaf.
John, thank you very much for this fantastic presentation. And I was particularly fascinated by the end of the talk when you came to the opportunities of AI in lesson plans, using it particularly as a teacher. And I'm also really fascinated about all the developments now in AI that can really change the game in schools and can be important tools for improving learning on the side of the students. And my question is here, not only what do you think about AI as a tool for the teachers in preparing their lessons, but of AI for the students in the classroom so that they can use AI in the classroom for fostering learning.
Thanks, Olive. Well, firstly, I want us to go back 10 years. When social media came out, Twitter and Facebook and all that, we did not have the discussion about the guardrails. We ignored it. And I think we've paid an enormous price for that. It's got some incredibly negative things. In the same way, we published a paper a couple of years ago. There are some incredibly negative aspects of AI. At times, quite horrendously negative. I think now's the time we need to talk about those guardrails. There is incredibly positive uses of it. And I also look and say, why is it when we introduced computers into schools in 1975, it took 40 years before computers in schools had an effect size greater than 0.3. Teachers were the slowest innovators of computers. Now, tricky, they used it tremendously for themselves. They used it for the low-hanging fruit, but they didn't use it to change the nature of their teaching. I think AI is going to have a very slow infiltration into our classrooms for the same reason. But here's my answer. I think we need to get the right question on the table, and for me, that is, what skills do we need to teach our students and our teachers to successfully use AI? And the first one I've already mentioned. We are going to have to teach our students how to ask questions. Even more, particular kind of questions, probative questions. Because you know, Olive, that if you ask AI a wrong question, it'll give you an answer. And so I think teaching students how to ask probative questions is an absolutely critical skill for them to use it successfully. Let me go to another one. At the moment, in your classrooms, who's in control of quality? The teacher. The teacher decides what the student's going to learn, when they're going to learn it, how they're going to learn it, how much time they're going to spend on it, how they're going to be assessed on it, and whether they move to somewhere else. I'm sorry. In AI, students have to be taught quality control. They have to be taught, for instance, evaluative thinking. Is it good enough? They have to be taught assessment credibility. Is it right? Is it wrong? They're going to have to be taught about choices, because the machine can tell it where to go next. And sometimes, in my experience, certainly, it tells you to go crazy ways next. Let's be fair. Sometimes teachers tell us to go crazy ways. But wise choices. And so that whole evaluative concept, and another one which I find fascinating is that already you can interact with these machines verbally. You don't need to write. I'm not sure we're very good at oral fluency in classrooms. I'm not sure we're very good at teaching kids how to listen. So I ask you to help me here in your group and saying, what are these skills we need to teach? And for goodness sake, let's get on and teach them quickly, because this new innovation is not going to be uninvented. It's not going to go away. It is going to have incredibly undesirable consequences if we don't look at those skills. And so I think, Olive, that's my answer to you, is what to the students, is don't just let them use the machine. Oh my goodness, because they'll discover very quickly what the boundaries are and where they're not. I think we have to worry about those skills, particularly of probative questioning, and particularly of quality control. Now, please.
Thank you.
The next, please. So, anderswo.
Yeah, hello. My name is Grüner Schwarz, and I had difficulties following your speech because there was so much in so short time. And as Mr. Köhler, I was fascinated by your ideas of how to use AI in the classroom or for planning and improving lessons. And my question is, how to start? Really, it's so much at the same time. Are there any best practice examples of sort of how to build up a sort of program there?
Well, yes, there's a yes and no answer to that, which just sounds like a typical academic, but yes, there are plenty of tools out there now, like I know about Eduku because I work with them in Germany, that have already these tools, but I don't think that's the only way we should go. I'm encouraging you to start playing. Like when you get a copy of this a PDF of this talk, and I know there was lots in there, but I love talking about the stuff, go to those prompts at the end and put them in yourself about your favorite topic. The only way to do it is that kind of exploration. And I'm sure you'll find very quickly that you start to come up and change your own prompt question, your own probative questioning to create your lesson plans. Like I remember my son, who's a teacher, when this first came out, and he did ask the same question as you. And so I said to him, and it was a Sunday night, and we live on a beach house in Australia, and so he'd had a lovely weekend, and he said, I have to have my lesson plan in by tomorrow, and I haven't done anything. So I said, okay, let's sit down. And we got into AI. I said, what are you teaching? And he said, I'm teaching this particular novel of Maurice Glockman. I've got 12-year-old students. So I said, create a lesson plan using the jigsaw method for 5 days relating to this particular book, anchor it with the Victorian Australian curriculum for language arts for 11-year-olds, create 5 questions, create some resources, and instantly it came up with it. Now, what did Kyle do next? He did next what every teacher in the world did. He said, I can improve that. Mm-hmm. Yes. Now, here's my point. What do we do otherwise? We sit down and we create our lesson plan, and then we administer it to our students, and then sometimes, not often, we say, how can I improve it? It's too late. You've administered it. At least if you sit down with AI and talk, and that's the beauty. You have to interrogate it. Like when he interrogates, well, how do you want to improve it? He said this. So I re-prompted it and redid it again. And at the end of about half an hour, he said, can you print that out for me? And that was his lesson plan. Now, what did he do when he administered it? He tweaked it, he changed it, he modified it. I'm encouraging you to do that. That's the only way to start to get some confidence to do it, because remember the maxim, the argument I want on this. I want the human in the middle. I want the teacher in the middle. I don't want you to go and buy a script and administer it. I want you to do that interrogation. So I really beg of you to, ChatGPT, it's free. Yes, you get a paid version to get on and just start playing with it. And as I say, I'm going to give you the prompts. I'm sure Jens and Olive can help you with the prompts. And I think your creativity is unlimited.
Thank you.
So I just have to walk through the room.
Hello. I'm using ChatGPT since the very first beginning, and in the beginning I thought AI cannot replace teachers. What do you think, and AI can replace at least. And especially when we think about people building up relationships with machines or partnerships sometimes. What do you think?
Oh, look, others have said this before me, so I'm just repeating what others said. AI will not replace a teacher. A teacher using AI will replace a teacher. That human in the middle is critical. The machines are going to get better and better, but there is still, as you hinted at, there is still that interaction with others. Students learn as much from other students, for good and bad, as they learn from you. As you heard me talk in the talk, I'm not a fan of words like personalization and individualization. I want your society and my society to be a civil society, which means we have to work with others. I want respect for self and respect for others. So I'm not a fan of the notion that a computer will replace a teacher. And quite frankly, as Skinner, the behaviorist, said many, many years ago, if a computer can replace a teacher, for goodness sake, get rid of that teacher. I want the human in the middle. I want you to, after a while, start exploring with the students, teaching them how to ask probative questions to create and improve their lessons. But remember, students don't know what they don't know. Now, I, for example, when it came out, started to go back and reteach myself Spanish. I got to a point where I knew I was not making any progress because I did not know what I didn't know. I asked the machine, what should I do next? And it kept looking and it kept making me do what I already could do. I certainly see that humans will never be out of the picture when it comes to the teaching, if for no other reason that we should be learning together as much as we should be learning alone. Teachers who don't use AI, I think, will become redundant in time, and I think they will cause more damage because they don't know how their students are using, and their students will be using. Like social media, our students found ways to use social media that we never dreamed of. Same with AI. Please get ahead of them.
Good evening, Dr. Hattie. Thank you for the intriguing contribution. Now, in the beginning of your talk, you briefly mentioned upon or touched upon the tremendous power of high expectations. And my question is, well, a simpler one. How do I adopt a culture of high expectation?
Well, let me tell you what Christine does. She goes into schools in the first week of the school year and she asks, with permission, the teachers to do a test of math, reading and phys ed. Those are her interests. She waits to the end of the month. She gives the results to the teachers. She waits to the end of the month and she goes back and she goes, each student, she says to the teacher, like, you've got to know the students over the month, you've got my assessments, you've got your own assessments. Where do you think that student's going to be at the end of the year on the curriculum line? Now, I've sat with her doing this, and I can tell you now that some teachers take students, and at the end of the year, they have them lower than where they were at the beginning of the year. Lower. And they're successful in doing that. They're exhibiting what their expectations. Now, the expectation research is fascinating. So when you meet another person, you have expectation of that person usually between 6 and 12 seconds. And then you modify, or some of us do. I'm sure you do more than I do. Modify your expectations depending what happens. Some people don't. That initial expectation sticks with them. And this is where that collaborative efficacy is so powerful, where you hear teachers saying, oh, that student can't do it. That student's got horrible parents. That student comes from a broken home. That student's lazy. You've got to contest those things. Every child can be a successful learner. Not every child is going to be Einstein or Beethoven or Madame Curie, but every child is a learner. And that's the time when you start contesting expectations. This is the role of leadership. And I don't know about you, but I've been in so many schools where the teachers and sometimes the leaders all want to tell me about, oh, this school's got Paul, this school's got 47 languages, this school's got all these immigrants, this school's got all these things. And I can hear the expectations screaming. And I want to say, well, show me some of these kids. Show me some of their work. Show me their work over time. And look, one of the things I'm very particular about is I'm success-driven. I want to see, and I've never been in a school in the world where there aren't pockets of success. And I want to make that the narrative. Well, how come that teacher can make that kind of student who comes with virtually no language, has just crossed the border, how can they make a difference? And you can't. And yeah, it does require confrontation, and you might need to be better at confronting than I am, because I'm a little bit too impatient. But I do think you have to call it, and I think that's the role of leadership. I think that's the role of collective advocacy. And it's no different when you ask students. Like, students will tell you they can't do things. Well, tell me more about the can't. Well, tell me what you can do. And our job is to switch the can't to the can. It's being vigilant about the narrative that you're hearing.
So some more questions here? So John, I have a question. So you talked a lot about climate, and would climate integrate things like teaching strategies, like classroom support, classroom management, and cognitive activation? Do these things belong to climate, in your opinion?
Now, we use a very old-fashioned word, Jens. We call it academic press. And that, is there a press towards challenge, towards learning, towards achievement and success? And that brings in what you're saying about cognitive activation, about the teaching methods. But the teaching methods, yes, almost not really, because that's in the second phase. Like what I want, and the reason I focused on that, is I want us as teachers to stop and say, what is this experience like for students in this classroom? Remember, I want teachers to stand in the shoes of students and understand what their impact is. And remember that conspiracy I talked about. Kids above average want teachers to talk more about the facts. And that leaves so many students behind. And so no, the climate is much more about what's the press in here. Is it safe to make errors? Is there opportunities? Are there multiple opportunities? Trying to look at it from the student point of view before we get the teacher views about the lesson planning and all that. That's the second phase. And so no, and I take an extra strong argument here that it's the school leader's responsibility for the climate and culture in every class and across the school. We can't wait for each teacher to get it right. And I invite you to think, when you were at school, some of those teachers you had which you didn't feel welcomed in, you didn't feel invited, you didn't feel belong. You weren't as successful in those years as in the years where you felt invited, belonged. And again, as a granddad, I'm watching my various grandkids. It's frightening already to see some of them in classes where they don't feel invited and belong. They don't feel it's safe to make an error, and some do. That climate is so critical for the nature of success.
So the most important thing is teacher-student relationship, as we found in the meta-analysis on motivation and self-concept?
Well, yes and no. Remember, yes, that's critical, but for a reason. Some classes have very high teacher-student relationships, but error is not welcomed. So I want to see the teacher-student relationships as the foundation. I want to see the student-student relations as the foundation for a reason. And the reason is the errors, not just the climate. And I'm sure you can think of teachers. I'm thinking of one now. It was fun. It was enjoyable. The teaching-student relationships were high. But, dares you make an error, there was no challenge. It was just fun. That's it.
So fun is not enough. Okay.
I want more. I'm greedy.
Okay, but we can continue our discussion in 4 weeks or so in Kiel, when you come to Kiel.
I'm looking forward to that.
Wonderful. So thank you very much again, John, and enjoy your day wherever you are. I think it's Toronto. Yes,
yes, I'm on the lakes here in Toronto, and it's sunny and beautiful.
Oh, wonderful. So give him a hand, and thank you, John. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.